What's going on? This is Boxing Source here. In the year 2018, and we have a few things going on here in the first few months of the year. Of course, you got a lot of boxing events that are coming up in the first few months. Starting off with the event over at the Barclays Center, headlined by the main event with Errol Spence Jr. defending his title against Lamont Peterson. So we're looking forward to that. But this particular video is about the subject of ducking. And as you can see with the title, the question is, what is up with all this ducking talk? And this question is brought up because I'm hearing a lot of talk about Anthony Joshua ducking Deontay Wilder, and it's not making sense to me at all. There's a little timeline that I'm going to go through, and let's see if we could go bit by bit with this timeline. All right. So, in 2015, pretty much the beginning of 2015, right, we had Deontay Wilder win the WBC title over Bermond Stavern. This was at the beginning of 2015, January 17th to be exact, to win the WBC heavyweight title there, right? And, you know, he became the WBC champ. And, you know, at the time there, like I was saying, you had other champion by the name of Vladimir Klitschko. And Vladimir Klitschko was the unified champion. He had, you know, multiple belts. He had the IBF belt. He had the WBA Super Championship at the time. He also was the WBO champion and the IBO champion at the beginning of 2015. And there was, you know, early talks with, you know, Deontay Wilder winning the heavyweight title that he could potentially go up against Vladimir Klitschko for the undisputed heavyweight championship. However, right after Deontay Wilder won the title, you had co-manager Shelly Finkel saying that, you know, he wasn't going to rush Wilder to fight Vladimir Klitschko. And that he said that, you know, Wilder's just a baby winning the title. You know, just let him get a few fights in and get his feet wet with the belt, and then we'll, you know, have a mandatory and whatnot. Now, bear in mind that Deontay Wilder had his 33rd professional fight when he won the belt. That was, once again, that was his 33rd professional bout when he fought Bermond Stavern in January 2015. And he had been a pro since 2009. And yet you have Shelly Finkel saying that Deontay Wilder is just a baby winning the title. Now, moving forward in the timeline, you have Vladimir Klitschko with those other heavyweight title belts making a defense against Brian Jennings at Madison Square Garden. And then he defended the titles against Tyson Fury in November of 2015, and we know what happened there with Fury winning those titles. Now, with Fury as a unified champion, they had something scheduled for Fury and Vladimir Klitschko to have a rematch. But even with that, you have Fury stepping up to Wilder in January 2016 after Wilder defended his WBC title against Artur Szpilka. They built it up like Fury and Wilder would have been the next fight for the undisputed title if Vladimir Klitschko did not beat Fury in a rematch. But however, Fury Klitschko 2 did not happen as Fury was suspended for drug use. Right? So now, after Wilder had his voluntary defenses, as Shelley Finkel stated, he had another voluntary defense before his mandatory was due, which is that defense against Artur Szpilka at the Barclays in January of 2016. We know of the story with Alexander Povetkin, so that fight ended up getting scrapped. So that scheduled fight between Deontay Wilder and Alexander Povetkin ended up getting scrapped. Therefore, the WBC granted Deontay Wilder another voluntary defense, which was against Chris Arreola, who was ranked below 30 in many heavyweight rankings. So you go from potentially challenging your mandatory challenger in Alexander Povetkin, who was one of the top heavyweights in the world, to Chris Arreola, who was a fairly lowly ranked heavyweight that had his previous fight overturned to a no contest or no decision because of drug use or being caught for drug use. But they went ahead and had that fight anyway. Deontay Wilder, Chris Arreola over in Alabama. Wilder wins that fight, but gets injured in the process and sits out for the rest of 2016. During that time, the WBC made a decision to keep Povetkin in the WBC rankings, even though he was tested positive for meldonium in that first scheduled fight against Deontay Wilder. They kept him there in the WBC rankings, provided that he fought Bermane Stiverne for that mandatory position. Bear in mind that Bermane Stiverne, after his loss to Deontay Wilder, only fought once, and that was against Derek Rossi near the end of 2015. This scheduled fight between Bermane Stiverne and Alexander Povetkin did not go out or go through because Povetkin got tested positive for another steroid. So that fight got scrapped, and then Bermane Stiverne got elevated to number one at the end of 2016. That we're at the end of the 2016 year. Deontay Wilder ends up recovering from his injuries, and then he comes back to have another voluntary defense. This time, it was against Gerald Washington. So near the end of February, he defends the WBC title against Gerald Washington. And now he has a mandatory due. Yet again, but this time it's Bermane Stiverne. Now, Bermane Stiverne was talking about, hey, I'm the mandatory, hey, I'm number one, hey, Deontay Wilder can't do anything until he defends the title against me. Now, from February to August, Deontay Wilder could have gotten his mandatory out of the way, but he didn't. I bring this up because the WBC states in its rules that the champion has to defend the title every 90 to 120 days, and if they don't, then they have to apply for an exemption. When the talk by Stiverne was brought up about his mandatory spot, there was backlash coming from fans and maybe from Deontay Wilder saying that, well, we could do this fight, but there's no network that's, willing to pick it up or willing to take on the fight. Now that is interesting to me because I'm trying to figure out how is that the case when these networks were able to pick up the voluntary defenses that Deontay Wilder had. The voluntary defenses where Wilder faced, Eric Molina, or Johan Duhaupas, or, as mentioned before, Artur Szpilka. And if I'm not mistaken, that Artur Szpilka fight was on Showtime. Now, to be real, that rematch between Deontay Wilder and Bermane Stiverne could have been done in the summer, but it got elongated to be part of that November 4th card. Now here's where the Ortiz ordeal comes in. Folks want to claim that Wilder was going to challenge Luis Ortiz on November 4th and step up to face Luis Ortiz when Anthony Joshua would not. And my question to that is, how is that the case? How is that possible? Now, let's go into the history of the WBA, as Ortiz at the time was the interim WBA heavyweight champion. What I'll do is I'll go into the history of the WBA and show how they have dropped the ball since the beginning of 2016. Now, at the beginning of 2016, the WBA announced a heavyweight tournament. Did y'all forget about that? That was supposed to be the tournament that was supposed to consolidate the belts, the interim heavyweight title, the regular heavyweight title, and the super heavyweight title. Now, how did that whole tournament turn out? Well, let's see. We had one fight between Lucas Brown and Ruslan Chagayev for the WBA regular title. That was in March of 2016 or so. And that's pretty much it. We didn't have no Klitschko Fury 2. We didn't have no Ortiz Ustinov that was part of the tournament. And there was no Frez Oquendo versus anybody, as Frez Oquendo was supposed to fight the winner of Lucas Brown and Ruslan Chagayev, but that fight never happened either. So with that being known, the WBA had Ortiz at placed at number one since the beginning of 2016 at least, when he beat Tony Thompson at the DC Armory in March. That was the same day that Lucas Brown defeated Ruslan Chagayev. After the fight between Luis Ortiz and Tony Thompson, Ortiz balked at fighting Ustinov, for money and that type of thing. And there was no Lucas Brown-Frez Oquendo fight. The WBA regular title ended up being vacant. And the WBA super title was vacant since Fury was, quote-unquote, retroactively suspended. So the question now becomes, how doesn't the WBA make a fight between Luis Ortiz and Frez Oquendo, or Frez Oquendo against Ustinov for the WBA regular title, especially since Ortiz was the interim champion? Now you see what was going on with the WBA during the year 2016 or so. And while that happened, the IBF had a new heavyweight champion in Anthony Joshua, as he was able to defeat Charles Martin for that belt. Now, you have Anthony Joshua as the IBF champion, and he was able to defeat Dominic Breazeale in his first defense of that IBF belt. And then after that, he was able to defeat Eric Molina for that second defense. Once he beat Eric Molina, the announcement came that he would fight Vladimir Klitschko in April 2017. It was later on that the WBA said that it would add the WBA Super Championship to that match. So that means that the fight between Anthony Joshua and Vladimir Klitschko would be for the IBF Championship and the vacant WBA Super Championship. Now hold on a second. How come the WBA had not made a fight for the WBA regular title between Luis Ortiz and Vladimir Klitschko, or, as mentioned before, Luis Ortiz and Freza Kendo, or the next highest guy available? That is usually the route when the world title is vacant, so why didn't they do that in this case? Now we know that Anthony Joshua beat Vladimir Klitschko to retain the IBF title and get the vacant IBO championship and that WBA Super Championship. Now, he had to fulfill his mandatory obligation or get stripped. The first one was the IBF title, as he held it for a year at that point that he beat Vladimir Klitschko. He got the title fight made against Kubrat Pulev, as Pulev was the IBF mandatory, and then once that was completed, he would have faced Luis Ortiz as the WBA mandatory. Now, just because Wilder said that he wanted to fight Ortiz does not mean that Joshua was ducking Ortiz. If Joshua fought Luis Ortiz before Kubrat Pulev, then he would have been stripped of the IBF title. That's usually how the IBF works. If you don't fight the mandatory, then they'll be the quickest to strip you of that belt. Now, circling back to the point that is raised by many boxing fans, that Anthony Joshua is ducking Deontay Wilder. This is what I want the people that say this to prove to me. Show me at what point during the time that Wilder won the WBC title in January 2015 to now, where he, Shelly Finkel, Lou DiBella, Al Heyman, JD's, or anyone in this team formally approached Joshua and his team in reference to making a fight. Now, I'm not saying bring up instances where Wilder said that he wanted a fight with Joshua. I'm saying bring up where they sent an offer to Joshua's team to fight. Did they do it after he beat Stavern the first time in 2015? Did they do it when the Alexander Povetkin fight fell through? Did they do it after the Gerald Washington fight? Did they do it when Anthony Joshua beat Vladimir Klitschko and Wilder was at the stadium for that fight? All I want to know is when those teams met up before the week of November 5th to November 11th of 2017. Just want y'all to prove that. Now, this last part of the video goes to someone in the YouTube boxing community or online boxing community. Mueburan74, as I have stated before, has one of the best channels for boxing. Now, however, on multiple occasions, we differ in perspective in reference to Deontay Wilder. Now, he had a video last week about Joshua ducking Wilder, and one of the points brought up was about legacy and that Joshua is not trying to build a legacy. Now, I disagree with that. As mentioned before, Joshua defeated Vladimir Klitschko to become a unified champion. The mere fact that Joshua was able to do that within 19 professional fights is an accomplishment. After having a mandatory defense, which ended up being against Carlos Takam, he is now about to face Joseph Parker for the IBF, WBA Super, IBO, and WBO titles. That fight is most likely going to be between March 24th and April 6th. That would mean that he could hold 4 titles after 21 pro fights. Now I'm going to bring up a comparison here in reference to Anthony Joshua and Deontay Wilder. Now, from Joshua's 13th fight to his 20th pro fight, he has faced Kevin Johnson, Garrett Cornish, Dylan White, Charles Martin, Dominic Breazeale, Eric Molina, Vladimir Klitschko, and Carlos Takam. Those opponents had a combined record of 230 wins and 17 losses. Wilder's opponents during his 13th to 20th fight were Harold Sconiers, Dan Sheehan, DeAndre Abram, Reggie Pena, Damon Reed, Dominic Alexander, and Daniel Cotto. Their combined record, 132 wins and 99 losses. Now that says a lot about that resume from Deontay Wilder in comparison to Anthony Joshua. Now I've heard that Brooks' resume has been criticized up to his title match against Sean Porter and also his questionable title defenses against JoJo Dan and Frankie Gavin. I have also criticized the resume of Gennady Golovkin up until last year when he faced Daniel Jacobs and Canelo Alvarez. Well, I feel that we have to do the same thing with Deontay Wilder. He has not faced highly ranked competition. It doesn't have anything to do with mandatories. The fact is that he has faced just one opponent ranked in the top 10 according to the Premier Boxing Organization in 39 pro fights. Now that has to raise a few eyebrows. We'll see if he actually fights Luis Ortiz on March 3rd, but for me it is him that should be stepping up as he has been a pro longer than any of the world champions right now in the heavyweight division. And with that, this video will come to a close. Thanks for listening and share your thoughts below. Boxing Source out.